I have to start by saying that I don't really want to give a usual lecture of data and other things because I have to share also with the audience why even I am doing this because we are doing other bilingualism conferences later. I'm very, but I'm not trying to convey that these experimental talks will not be useful. But as you might have guessed, this is a very special type of a conference we are organizing, and the reasons are the following. First and foremost, I would express some of my dissatisfaction, not with the field, but with myself. So I have had the opportunity to study bilingualism for a pretty long time with university students and bringing them to laboratories and doing the usual tasks, and then developing ideas. And that track has been continuing both in Allahabad and later in Hyderabad. And many of you uh, may know that they are located in two different places. But heritage bilingualism or things of this sort are a natural outcome of our field's self-correcting measures. First of all, a rapid growth in the idea that people are very different when they are contextualized in their own environments. Second, language, identity, cultures widely differ and they impact mind-brain functioning. And third, we have not had the opportunity to study these people as they use cognition. The emphasis is on functionalism rather than more theoretical stances on cognition, because that we have had for 50 years. As cognition is used by people in their actual habitats, in day-to-day situations. And fourth, being from India, where most of these situations naturally occur, heterogeneity is the norm. It makes more sense to take the experimental attitude and go into people and study them as they are. So my own background has been a mixed sort of because I've studied illiterate people with low literacy in their own training studies, and but I never got a chance to study language functioning or bilingualism or the practice of it in more natural situations. So my brief introduction today will be having two main focuses. One is to tell you my own anxiety, or what I think to do further, and an invitation to other like-minded collaborators who would like to come over to India and study these populations, and we will jointly explore the funding opportunities. So it is out of the lab movement. I'm not abandoning the laboratory-based research, but I want to take hints from what we know works and take the tools and techniques and study people as they use language or they listen to language or they're doing other things in their own natural circumstances. It's not easy. So right now, I would like to uh, give you a brief overview of where I am currently uh, located. And as you can see, it is southern India. It's a hill station, and it has had a long history of plantations. And the Britishers came over and they, colonized, and obviously changes in people's attitudes, behavior, language, but original inhabitants are still there. It's very unique area. The geodiversity, the linguistic diversity, and the ethnicities are still maintained and preserved by the government of India. They are called the scheduled tribes. So their languages are protected, or not, we don't know because language is a dynamic thing, but at least they are protected. So we are located currently. Tomorrow we are going for a field work to see whether it is possible to take equipments there and study them, and whether they are agreeable or whether they have other attitudes, or whether they don't like our tasks, or whether these tasks will appear ridiculous. Um, so the whole thing might just be very different. So we will just have to experience it first and then plan it out. So I'm interested in finding out more interface possibilities to see whether we collectively can do certain projects. Now, there are two things here. Needless to say, anthropological linguists and cultural anthropologists and developmentalists and many other people from linguistics like Stephen Levinson and his group at Max Planck. They have had been following people and in different places, and they have been recording descriptive linguistic data. So that is a solid history. And such work has happened in India as well. So two of my friends who are co-conveners are linguists. So we have a strong tradition of descriptive recording of linguistic behavior, vocabulary, grammars of these people. But the departure is that we never had any modern, empirical, hypothesis-oriented studies on these people. So that lacuna has to be fulfilled. So what I mean by that is that we have to understand cognition not more as computation that happens everywhere in all the brains similarly, but as people use it in order to live their own lives in particular circumstances. And the circumstances can be very different from one another. In every 30, 40 kilometers, it might be different. So this is the approach. It will not be, that's the cultural cognitive science, the association that we have created, the journal that we publish, and many speakers who are here are part of the journal. So it would be more experimental, innovative, interface, multidisciplinary, and it considers the lacunas that we have not been able to do so far, but it doesn't try to also repeat the old things. So we have to go beyond descriptive vocabulary recording and to use our modern hypothesizing tendency to find out, okay, how these people's cognition actually works. So language bilingualism, multilingualism for me would be a proxy, because I know a little bit more about these things and other things, and then other experts come in with their own knowledge. Heritage bilingualism appeared in the discourse about 10, 15 years ago. I can't be so sure, but it was about people that have had a historical classical past. That would include their architecture, that would include their other cultures, and then people started recording, and there was a tendency to talk of their preservation, obviously. But today we are probably talking more in context of language shift and alteration and language loss as more modernism sets in and technological progress all around the world, and more so in developing countries like India. So everything is changing every other day. I can't go about all that, but I think that if you are just reading any standard newspaper, you would just see these images that people do not have the same habitats that they used to have 10 years ago. And heavily networked, well connected, but at the same time not so connected as well. So heritage bilingualism in India is a new theme, I would say. And there are many corners of heritage speakers that have maintained their language and ways of life and cultures. But nothing much systematic has happened on them, as the Vice Chancellor earlier today noted. So we need to correct that slightly. To me, heritage bilingualism obviously would not just be to preserve a language of a people without showing any concern for modernity and the changes that are too demanding. So it would also be to study cognitive consequences of such changes, whether educating their children in that language or keeping those languages available to them in digitized formats is just enough, or they need to be also educated in English or other vernacular languages where lots of digitized information and opportunities are taking place, not certainly in their own languages. So there are obviously possibilities that we can be idealistic and romantic about just preservation and talk about people as if they are fossils, but we also have to keep our eyes open towards the changes that are happening all around them, particularly with regard to the socioeconomic aspects of language use and multilingualism. And many scholars in these countries already have noted that, but they have had many different views on it. For example, a prominent scholar that has written quite a bit on multilingualism in India is Ajit Mohanty, and he has a different view about mother tongue education than I hold or others of my generation hold. So we need to be also looking into others' works on bi-multilingualism than just be restricting ourselves to just a neuropsychological or cognitive aspect to it, because we are just beginning to look at these people with a different lens. So currently we are here, and we are trying to have a first feel of both the language use, the context. It's very important word for me, the context. It just cannot be a laboratory chair and table and a computer monitor, because as I was asking N, whether the vocabulary that one usage or is comprehending is coming from a hypersensitive collection of ideas in that person's mind that he or she uses most of the time. And somebody else, Alexander Liris, asks about frequency. So it's also equally important. What they see is what they use, and what they use is what they feel. So I think we never had any opportunity to ask these kind of questions to university students at all, because we just assume that these are the kind of words that they have to look, or they have to look a bit more towards one than the other one. So some of those things will be corrected as we take cognizance and talk to them and collect some data and try to plan our experiments in their own context, rather than bothering them too much. So this is the location is deep down in southern India, and in the hills, and there are many language, varieties of language speakers around. The main language, state language, is Tamil, and they have to speak Tamil to get by life. And many of them probably also know English, and they have their own unique languages that belong to different language families, and they have been maintained, and they have their own cultures being expressed in those languages and rituals and various other ethnographic manifestations. So Nilgiri Hills are the hills where coffee and other tea, they grow, and they work in various odd jobs, or many of them they just are landowners. So it would be also important to get into to know them as an interface community that are in a migration mode, or they're kind of static, and they don't have much interaction with the other world that is just 150 miles from here. So we really have no concrete data or concrete theories to speculate, except that we spend some time, and we come and we study, and then we go back to the laboratories and come back with appropriate experiments. So this is one of the ways that I am at this point thinking. I don't know other people would. Fantastic pictures. I would shoot my own pictures tomorrow, but these pictures are from the internet, but they would look like this. So as you can see, all these pictures are pretty romantic, pretty idealistic, but then when we go over there and we want to experience language use and communication and vocabulary use and use of English, whether it is even there, or use of Tamil, the state language, and what they would like to, how is their referencing? What is the range with which they want to express themselves? So we will know a little bit, and there are varieties of people that also may have hierarchies among them. So we don't know how many hierarchies are there, whether they have a system where certain the sociolinguistic variables being expressed differently as a function of hierarchy of people, the stratification theories. So all that would be also relevant, because when we're trying to do field studies, we just can't assume that people are okay with all sorts of language that we present to them as stimuli. So this offers a clear challenge. But at the same time, people may be thinking, well, he's just talking about some anthropological. No, what I want to say is that let's examine important theories that in wild multilingualism we have had so far. The theory of cognitive reserve. And some of my friends like Jubin and others would speak today, like use of bimultilingualism keeps your brain fine till later years is a very dominant idea. Cognitive advantage theory, there are some troubles, but I think most people accepted that bilinguals or multilinguals are better off in doing certain tasks. The other is the language acquisition, literacy, education-centric theory that bimultilingual children do better. Data that comes from UK and other places, and Israel. Even I was closely following when I was there. I was following the nice Israeli bilingual schools where Hebrew and Arabic both are taught together. So I was trying to see. So there is a lot of fine theories that we just need to take out from the arsenal and go and see whether these people are also a party to those theories. That's a very important trigger for all of us, whether cognitive reserve works similarly or they don't care about it at all, and they don't even understand that they have to keep using bimultilingualism all the time in order to remain fit. But most important question for us in that context would be, what does it mean to be cognitively fit in that particular circumstance and being them? So it might mean something very different than a modern city dweller like me or you, who has to transact through various other distractions. So there are chances that we might be surprised. So we have to be slightly ready to have these surprises. So the language that they speak is Kota. So some of my friends would like to collaborate and they would need more information. We can have a small group meeting later and see the possibilities to study these particular varieties. And please watch out for the talk by my friends, co-conveners, Arul, Moji, and Ramesh. They are into this and they would offer you more statistical information. So these people stay in huts and they speak different dialects. And I do not know how many speakers each dialect has, whether there is any script attached to such languages, or they invariably learn or end up learning Tamil and English, some of them who migrate to cities. And how endangered are they actually? Because the word endangered speech communities is widely prevalent in different disciplines, and all that means is that certain people's numbers are decreasing or language speakers are decreasing, and there is a good chance that after a while that language will no longer be there. So that angle also will be important for us. Now you can see this slide shows that a certain language is a dialect of Kannada. So there are 3 or 4 states that are bordering this hilly region, Karnataka, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu. So there are these are interfaith areas. The flora, fauna, if you collect vocabulary, I think you will find this vocabulary is being represented in all these other languages also. You just have to be very careful that, okay, it's just 50 kilometers away. That's a different state and a province and with a different state language. But these vocabularies are common, maybe with a slight phonological twist to it. So it would be good to have the linguistic anthropological records that already our friends have done in India for the last 30, 40, 50 years to go through all those records and make our stimuli so that it works with these people, rather than we bring our stimuli, what we have been using with the university students there in Hyderabad or elsewhere. So the background is, this is my, new, you can say a little bit of new motivation to go out with a head-mounted eye tracker or a glass or a EEG system that is portable, not threatening enough for these people, and to find out this tech and go out and do these studies with these people. So that's without being too interfering with them, because they don't understand how to sit quiet and attend to a task that runs for 1 hour or 1.5 hours. So we have to strategize, and PhD students who would work have to be very, very well aware of these limitations. Now, having built this, will there be a theoretical theme that I would like to address particularly? Yes. I have been conducting empirical work, and we have published some, and some would be coming out on this question, that how bilinguals and multilinguals adapt to one another's requirements in a dynamic situation, and how the shift between the languages, how they select a particular language to refer to, and how they adjust with one another. So there is a lot of work. Obviously, people are aware by Jubin and others, and I also have done some work with university students that speak different languages. Now, what does it mean to adapt to somebody? An interlocutor essentially is a talking partner or a person who speaks to you or is in the environment. The key idea is that we as speakers or as members of the speech community are hyper aware about others' language abilities. And a new theory that is emerging in the field incorporates affective awareness as a big deal, because humans emphatically know for sure that if I use this word or this language, it would not be nice in real life situations. So language management is no more a reactive, inhibitory control setup. I mean, there are people who may disagree with me, but it is an emphatic awareness of the speaker to guess and anticipate what would work very well in the current scenario and what would not work well in another scenario. So this type of judgment is very critical, more than mechanically, sifting between lexicons just because you know both the languages. So an interactional context essentially becomes an emphatic embodied context where people are genuinely aware about other people's state of minds. Like, for example, one example which our dear friend Albert Costa, who is no more, used to work, a foreign language effect in Spain, that people speak in mother tongue for sensitive things. In India, also, mother tongue is heavily used to express sensitive things. And nobody speaks English in certain situations, because if you use English just because you know very well, you would be considered, rough or not being in harmony. So language choice is emphatic, is connected to theory of mind. And we have been working now around this idea to see whether university students even bring these types of knowledges. So our experiments are simple. I'll just show you one or two. We earlier thought that language proficiency is enough as a variable. Like if I know English well, I would often use English. If I know my mother tongue well, I would use that frequently. But we have been seeing that people adopt. And that is a theory of mind emphatic assessment involved, that if a person finds that a person in front of you does not speak that well, then the speaker tries his or her best to cope with the situation by offering a facilitative lift to the person in the other language, even if he is so bad in that language. So this kind of emphatic shift is extremely important for theory of social cognition, because you just can't understand how social networking happens in more diverse situations like India, for example, where homogeneity is absolutely zero. If emphatic uh, mindset is not brought into the experiment, although I haven't exploited that, but I think I'm just trying to see how it can happen. So I don't have to lecture you on environment or speech communities or proficiency. Many of us are experts in that. We know what it is. And monitoring. So what is it that one is monitoring? The earlier dominant theory is monitoring of lexical use, that, okay, now English, now Hebrew, now Hindi. So you are activating particularly the lexical way it happens. But monitoring for me would be monitoring the state of mind of the person, that whether he wants to know something in Hindi at this point in time, my job will be easier rather than I start talking in English. So the choice to shift, the choice to innovate, the choice to keep activation is more emphatic to me now than what I used to think like 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Along with proficiency, I'm not ruling out proficiency not playing a role, but proficiency will be pretty secondary when I understand and incorporate these variables. And environment can be as large and expansive. This entire thing is an environment. Right now, as I speak from this part of the country, and when I am back in Hyderabad in the laboratory, there are two people that experimented. The experiment is an environment. So environment, it doesn't have any spatial boundary, but we try to constrain it depending on our own understanding. So to summarize till this point, I want to just use this theoretical motive to see whether emphatic awareness and social cognition and skills with those things, apart from vocabulary knowledge and proficiency, actually builds networks of speakers and hearers in a community. And that's how they have survived so far. And that's how all the preservation efforts are also on those things, rather than teaching a particular language so well to speak that it becomes ridiculous in a community, because the person has no sense when to use it and with whom to use it, because that part we have not considered in the research that we have published so far. Neither I have done. I'm not saying, I'm not giving myself a clean sheet. I also have not done it. So I am interested. Now, this theory that is being developed is exactly what I was trying to explain. That so far we have been focusing on ACC activation quite a bit, as many of you may know, and Juvin will be talking about that with vis-a-vis his own models and cognitive reserve. That a more reactionary control setup in the brain helps you out because it enforces attention. That's fine. I have no problem with that idea. But then new research is also suggesting that frontal areas that kind of evolved much later in order to control and take care of all these older areas like amygdala and insula, the affective control that they enforce is contextually appropriate. And that is the angle from a neuroscience side should help us to design more behavioral tasks. So whether emotional phases, for example, or the social variables, or variables that are very constitutive to a community, like, for example, caste in India, and social status or class. I was just looking at the literature linking class, social class to cognition. I was astounded. I was surprised to see that it has become a big variable now. People are openly comparing, people of different social classes in America, for example, are coming up with various ideas that class does matter in cognition. So in India, there are other variables, and gender. All these would be included in building this comprehensive theory And we keep also the older ideas that control is necessary in language production and comprehension, no doubt about it. But all these other variables, we still don't know whether those areas that we have been, assigning functions also to take care of these kind of things, like social, the frontal lobes involvement in social cognition. So, an effective evaluation, which is more socially relevant and dynamic, will be probably important in building these monitoring accounts or accounts that deal with innovation in specific situations. So we need to create experiments where we have to either artificially bring interlocutors or cartoons or faces or people, or we go out and try to stage it. Why not? You can stage an experiment by bringing interlocutors and study them live. So all this is just we have to look at. So currently, or for some time, I have been doing these studies where I essentially introduce certain cartoons as interlocutors to different speakers, and I tell a story about them, like he speaks English better than Telugu or Hindi, and they kind of create a mental image. And the whole idea is that this mental image pushes cognitive responses, which is true. Like what you know about someone is how you start viewing that person. That's one idea. Like in this talk, for example, we have been doing, these are ongoing tasks, and you can ask my question later. So we're training using visual world paradigm. You saw in Anne's work, visual world paradigm itself, like people, you measure fixations essentially, but can you train interlocutors through visual world? Like children learn how to speak people by looking at other children where they're looking at. It's a very well understood early behavioral pattern. To go back to Roger Brown and other people who have recorded, like if you are looking at X and Y while speaking something, I do end up learning not merely what you said, but where did you look at? So we're trying to bring these critical ideas by training people, and then we'll explore this interlocutors effect in more passive situations. So one idea that I have been exploring is not merely active interlocutors, but the presence of the person in other more situations where I'm not concerned with him, but I am influenced by his presence with the idea of him that I have in my mind, unless until the situation changes and he does something new. Like abruptly somebody speaking English so flamboyantly that you were not expecting, and now you consider him of very high class in India, and then he switches back and doesn't speak English for 2-3 days and fumbles, then your idea about him is different. It does happen in the world of politics and business if you look at TV interviews and all that. So interlocutors not only influence the way we want to channelize visual attention, but interlocutors also can influence even if they're absent later on. So these ideas are currently being pursued in the laboratory. I'm quite sure how much of this I can bring to the. So we are training, and then we are inducing in the participants' mindset that these people are of this sort. They look in an odd way, or they look in a context appropriate way, and then this image is built in their minds, and then we do all the experiments. So these experiments you will see probably as manuscripts soon. But what is appearing? I mean, another one. Let me summarize them. So we use this type of. I'm not very happy with the way they look, but there's no other way. I mean, if you want to make these cartoons and interlocutors look like. If you bring ethnic picturization, then there would be some oddness. But I think it's okay for the moment. For research, we have to work on that. How exactly to depict in 2 dimension, how people actually look, or is there a prototype of a look that is linked to certain languages? That is also a big deal. So yeah. So the pattern is the same. We introduce as interlocutors, then we do various tasks. This is an example of a cognitive control task, and we are assuming that after the familiarization, the mental model of that's the correct word. I think the mental model of the interlocutor will be controlling my or influencing my cognition in some control situation or in some other situation. We want to see the results of this soon, and I would like to probably share with as manuscripts. The two conclusions from these types of experiments. There are many others that are currently happening or I might have published. That human beings are very, very sensitive to other human beings, the way they look and what they have said at a certain visual context and where they looked at. So people can infer about your mindset, not merely by the language you speak or how you look, but also what object you were referring to, or was there something very eccentric about it. So all this will play a role in your own cognition, and we're talking about an embodied interactional situation where monitoring is an outcome of the cognitive flow you want to maintain with an interlocutor. After all, the study of bi-multilingualism is nothing but to understand pragmatics. So they cannot just be about specific tasks like object naming or listening to unique sentences, but it's about pragmatics. How much of bi-multilingualism will forge and maintain social relations in a particular context? Because this, in a social context where, unlike the university students that are uniquely brought into, and we don't know whether they're friends or not. If you study people in the real world, that network is pretty static. They are seeing one another all the time. They're living together. So that variable is far more important than bringing people that are not, they don't have any give and take, or they don't create the mental model that is going to be of any value to them later on. So there is some sort of artificiality with the way we have been doing these experiments, but I'm not very unhappy about them. I have learned something, and now it is time to change the paradigms. So these experiments are currently happening, and I'm quite sure, I think my time is over. I managed just. The call is to forge more working relationships, and I welcome all of you to the internal conference of cultural cognitive science that we will be we'll be doing in Hyderabad, and many of you would like to come to Hyderabad. Separately, all that advertisement will happen, and we can have tours to these areas even then to plan out more research. This is just a curtain raiser for that event. I thought, okay, let's talk first what practically we can do, and there are different people, different experts who are assembled here. It would be good to know their viewpoints also. For me, I would pursue this interactional adaptive strategies more in the wild. That's a vague word, nobody is in the wild, but outside the laboratory. And this perfectly harmonizes itself with upcoming fields like cultural cognitive science or diversity sciences, or the culture brain interface fields, where it's being heavily realized that every unique culture and people cognize things in their own ways, and there can't be a standard model. The standard model has given us ChatGPT, so there can't be anything better than that. That is the standard model of cognitive science's achievement for the last 50 years. I don't think it has gone anywhere in practically telling people how they cognize the world around them and live their lives. So there is a lot to happen. India is a very, very important at a transitional moment now because of rapid urbanization and rapid networking and digitization, complete digitization of money, I would say. Very rarely people are using cash in India. So even the illiterates and all kinds of people, they're using digitized forms of transaction. So, so essentially adaptivity to new symbols and complete normalcy within that. And in many other, bilingualism obviously is not outside all of these considerations, because we still do not have much of digitized socioeconomic stuff in other than English, maybe a little bit in Hindi, not subtly in their own languages. So bi-multilingualism probably gets talked and written about in a certain academic context, but not when it comes to actually understanding how people are using this. Some of these ideas I have written about a book that was published 6 months ago. I encourage you to we can discuss. There's some chapters that I wrote deliberately in order to predict, while rapid empirical attitudes in the study of cognition is fine, or computational or neuro tendencies, but at the same time, we just can't be away from realities that surround us. So we are all uniquely located in text. But as the convener also, I was speaking a bit of from a convener's point of view, that I why I have gathered all of you and what is expected. So I hope to have more discussions on that later, or any comments. Thank you for listening to my blabbering, but I think I intended to do so, because I would, on other occasions there would be some data, but these experiments are going to be laboratory experiments. But if you have anything more to say, how they can, whether my ideal romantic vision can be brought down to laboratory, or I'm just, yeah. So thank you very much, and I hope that you all will continue till the end of the conference. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll have just one question because we are running out of time. So if there's anybody from the audience who would like to ask a question.
Yeah, you are, I think.
There is.
Yeah,
so there are a couple of questions in the audience, in the chat. I'm just going to read that out.
Please. No, I think Johar is asking a question face to face. I will address that, then I'll go to, I'll look at the chat.
Ma'am, do you have a question?
No questions.
Hello.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Yeah, I actually put the question in the chat. I thought my internet is a little shaky here. I wanted to have some opinions, or maybe context dependent, how individual traits may impact language processing. Individual traits like how personality or attitude of a person would impact cognitive processing. So if you have some light on that, sir.
Well, I agree, but there are no current methodologies to track down. Let's say I bring 30 people and they are very different from one another. They have gone through different life experiences, or they're going through at that point. There's no way now to track down that into the Excel sheets of data, except we collect questionnaires. And that's the only way to qualitatively figure out what they say about themselves. So you need to use different statistical models than just averaging or looking at their dispersions from a central tendency. But theoretically, yes, certainly. And language is particularly such an effective cognitive response to the world that it is very, very unique, even though two people naming with the same lexical word, the same picture, they're undergoing different experiences. So that would make this talk a bit more problem, because you need to link experience of speaking or listening to the linguistic aspects of it, the labeling, the so sign signified signifier, because so would not have included experience or affective connotations or identities, social identities, because some people use a particular word in a particular context, other people do not, or they dislike. So there are critical issues involved here. But I agree, yes, this is an important point, and if you can carry out something, you should do.
Sure. Thank you, sir.
Yes, I have one question.
But trait is a complicated one. Yeah. Yes.
So thank you, sir, for this interesting talk. I'm really interested in this idea of theory of mind and the interaction that happens between two bilinguals. And we are also currently sort of exploring this idea. But one thing that we got stuck was coming up with the experimental design to actually tap this idea. So we are currently struggling with the design, but I really like this idea of bringing in theory of mind and emotion along with the interaction context into this bilingualism thing. So do you have any suggestions of that, or maybe we can do it?
Yeah. So, yeah, Niharika and I
Yes.
is a former PhD student of mine. We published quite a bit of early papers in bilingualism from Allahabad in linking proficiency to advantage. And she's a faculty at Allahabad Cognitive Science Center. The issue here is we are all understanding what we want to do, but first, because we really don't know how to make it simple, because all these variables can make the experiment complicated. And theory of mind has its own tasks. But I was saying, or using theory of mind from the point of view of empathic assessment of the listener, because that is not included in the current models, because the current models are reactive models. It's like an interlocutor's face is like a switchboard, or it kind of like a traffic sign. That model is the current model. An empathic model would be like the frontal areas modulating the amygdala or insula, the emotion older areas activity with regard to the current situation's ongoing assessment, how the situation is evolving. So we have to create more three-dimensional situation. I think VR can be used to some extent, or augmented reality type of designs where avatars are more impactful than just a picture, or a head-mounted glass type of an eye tracker, which we want to use as people are brought into a situation and they really are looking at and they're responding with language, and it is all being recorded and later analyzed. So I want to bring these notions to the usual, the popular, I would say, control theory, which is more attentional and more neuropsychological, and to social cognition and real life situations. Yeah. I think your stock is now, so I may be eating up her time.
Thank you so much for the talk.
All right. Thank you very much, and I'll respond to it. Yeah, you are now.